On a bright winter morning, snow covered the city like a blanket of silence. A Navy SEAL, still wearing his digital camouflage uniform, slowed his steps when he saw something that didn't belong in the cold. An old woman sat alone on the sidewalk, her hands shaking, holding a German shepherd wrapped in a worn blanket. A small cardboard sign hung from the dog's neck. It read, $5 for sale. She wasn't begging for money. She was giving up the last family she had. If you believe stories of loyalty, sacrifice, and second chances still matter, please subscribe and stay with us. Minneapolis wore winter like a crown of glass. The Mississippi River moved beneath a lid of ice and dark current, as if an old god were breathing slowly under a frozen altar. Snow had been falling since before dawn, thick, steady, relentless. Yet the morning was strangely bright, the kind of brightness that comes when clouds turn the sky into one giant pale lantern. The sidewalks shone as if dusted with silver, every street lamp and storefront sign reflected in the clean, hard white. Wind threaded through the streets with a patient cruelty, slipping between buildings and down alleys, searching for bare skin and weak seams in coats. It was the kind of cold that didn't scream. It simply insisted, and anyone who argued with it lost. On the riverfront, Riverside Park's iron fence ran like a black stitch along the snow, and the bare trees stood upright and still, their branches raised as if they were praying or surrendering. Ryan Walker moved through that brightness with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned to walk in worse places than winter. He was in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, built like a man carved from work rather than gym mirrors, thick through the chest, solid through the legs, and a little stiff around the joints as if his bones remembered too many hard landings. A close look revealed the kind of face that hadn't been allowed to stay young. Sharp cheekbones, a square jaw, and a thin line of stubble that turned his expression permanently serious, unless he chose otherwise. His eyes were a steady gray-green, the color of storm water, and they carried that distant focus people sometimes mistake for coldness, until they realize it's not coldness at all, but vigilance. He wore his Navy working uniform, the digital camouflage pattern continuous across the entire jacket, front placket, chest area, pocket flaps, without any solid color panels anywhere, as if even the fabric refused to break formation. The uniform looked practical rather than ceremonial, winter layered beneath, with gloves and boots made for traction, not style. To strangers, he could read as intimidating, a disciplined posture, a calm that didn't fidget, shoulders set like a door that had decided to stay closed. But the city didn't frighten him. What haunted Ryan wasn't noise or crowds, it was silence, the kind that arrives just before something goes wrong. He had not come to Riverside Park to play hero. Heroes were for posters and speeches, for crowds that needed a story tidy enough to clap for. Ryan came because he couldn't sleep when the air got too quiet. He'd left service with medals he never displayed and memories he never described, and he carried the after effects the way some men carry an old injury, without complaint, but always aware. In the months since returning to civilian streets, he'd built a routine like a small raft, morning walks, strong coffee, and long routes that kept his mind busy mapping corners and exits. The uniform helped him feel anchored. It made him feel useful, even if he wasn't sure to whom. And in the bright, biting Minneapolis cold, his breath rose in soft clouds, drifting away as if the day itself were exhaling. He was passing the iron fence when he saw her. At first, she looked like a bundled shadow against the snow, a shape too still to be safe. People don't sit on a sidewalk in this weather unless they've run out of better choices. Ryan slowed, instincts pricking. The brightness of the snow made everything sharp. The fence, the tree trunks, the icy crust on the sidewalk, so the stillness stood out even more, like a wrong note in a hymn. As he drew closer, the shape became a woman, elderly, seated on a folded piece of cardboard to keep the cold from stealing her heat too fast. She was small, hunched, and wrapped in a wool coat that had seen better decades. Her face was lined in a way that suggested not just age, but endurance. Fine wrinkles around the eyes and deeper ones carved from worry, from nights that didn't end with relief. Wisps of white hair escaped a knitted hat, and her skin, pale and weathered, had the faint ruddy burn of someone whose life had included too much wind. Her hands trembled, not theatrically but honestly, the kind of shaking that comes when warmth has been rationed for too long. Yet her eyes were clear, a watery blue that still held a stubborn spark, as if she had once been the kind of woman who could quiet a room with a glance. Pressed against her side was a German shepherd, full-grown, large, and powerfully built, the kind of dog people cross the street to avoid until they notice the calm in his posture. His coat was thick, sable and black along the back with warmer tan beneath, dusted with snowflakes that clung to him like salt. Even sitting, he looked ready to stand at a moment's notice. His ears were upright, his gaze alert, and his body curved subtly around the woman, shielding her from the open sidewalk. A worn blanket was wrapped around him, patched and frayed at the edges, as if it had been loved into exhaustion. His muzzle showed a hint of gray, age or experience, maybe both, and there was an old scar along one ear that told its own story without words. If he was a retired working dog, he wore retirement the way some soldiers do, quietly, with the job still alive in the bones. Around the dog's neck hung a piece of cardboard on twine. The letters were thick and uneven, written by a hand that shook in the cold. $1 for sale. Ryan stopped. The city seemed to pause with him. Snow continued to fall, but the world's noise felt muffled, as if the storm wanted him to listen. The woman looked up. Her eyes moved over Ryan's uniform, the digital camouflage catching light in tiny squares, and her gaze tightened as if she recognized something in him. Discipline, danger, duty, the same stubborn shape of a life spent answering calls. She swallowed, and her breath came out in a thin cloud. "Sir," she said, voice rough with cold and something worse than cold. Pride. "Please, can you buy him?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. He crouched a few feet away, careful not to loom. He knew animals, not in a pet store way, but in a field-tested way. Don't rush, don't crowd, let them read you. The German shepherd watched him closely. The dog didn't bare teeth, he didn't bark, but his eyes were intelligent, measuring, like a seasoned guard deciding whether the newcomer was a threat or a possible ally. Ryan's gloved hand rested open on his knee, a small sign of peace. "What's your name, ma'am?" Ryan asked, voice low, steady, the same tone he'd used to calm panicked people in the past. His words didn't carry pity, they carried respect. The woman hesitated, as if names could be stolen along with everything else. Then she said, "Margaret?" The name sounded old and reliable, like a key kept in a kitchen drawer for 50 years. She tried to straighten, but her shoulders trembled under the coat. "I'm sorry to trouble you." "You're not troubling me," Ryan said, because it was true. Trouble had looked very different in his life, and it rarely came with an elderly woman and a dog wrapped in a blanket. He glanced at the sign. $5? Margaret's mouth tightened. "I know, it's not what he's worth." Her gaze dropped to the dog, and for a moment the hard lines of her face softened, as if she were looking at a memory. "He's worth more than money." The dog pressed his side against her leg, steadying her like a living support beam. Margaret's fingers, stiff from cold, found the fur at his neck and held on. There was tenderness in that grip, but also desperation, the way someone holds a door shut during a storm. Ryan studied the dog again, the calm posture, the alertness, the way his attention didn't scatter. This was no ordinary stray. "He's trained," Ryan said, more statement than question. Margaret nodded once. "Yes," her voice shook. "He's a good dog." "Good dogs don't end up for sale on sidewalks," Ryan said gently, and he regretted the words the moment they left his mouth, because Margaret flinched as if he'd touched a bruise. "I didn't want this," she whispered. She blinked, and moisture gathered at the corners of her eyes. Not dramatic tears, but the quiet kind, the kind older people hate to show. "But winter doesn't ask what you want. Winter just takes." Ryan felt something old in his chest, the same knot he'd felt when he'd seen families displaced after storms, when he'd watched systems move too slowly while people suffered too quickly. He kept his voice calm. "Where's home, Margaret? You shouldn't be out here." Margaret's gaze darted toward the park and back, as if she feared being overheard by the snow itself. "Not far," she said. "Just not warm enough." The German shepherd's eyes flicked to the street behind Ryan, then back to Ryan, then behind Ryan again. His ears angled forward a fraction. It wasn't aggression. It was attention. Sudden, focused attention, as if a scent had drifted in on the wind and hooked into his memory like a barbed thread. Ryan noticed. People like Ryan survive by noticing. "How old is he?" he asked, keeping the conversation steady, giving Margaret something ordinary to hold on to. 8, Margaret said. Maybe 9. Time blurs when you're counting nights instead of days. She tried to smile, but it didn't fully form. He's retired. Retired from what? Ryan asked, though he already suspected the answer. Margaret's throat bobbed. Police work, she said. K9. The word landed with weight, like a badge placed on a table. He used to be my son's partner. Ryan's gaze sharpened. He knew the bond between handlers and their dogs, how it wasn't ownership so much as shared language, shared danger, shared trust. Where's your son? He asked. Margaret's breath caught, and the bright morning suddenly felt harsher, as if the sky itself leaned in. She looked down at the dog. He's not well, she said, and her voice turned smaller on the last word. Very sick. The dog's body tensed subtly, like a muscle remembering a command. His lips pulled back just enough to reveal a hint of teeth, not a snarl directed at Ryan, but a low, warning shape aimed at the air. A rumble formed in his throat, almost too quiet to hear under the wind, like distant thunder under a frozen lake. Ryan turned his head slightly, scanning the sidewalk behind him without moving too fast. The street was bright, open, a few cars far off, their tires whispering through slush. No one close enough to be a threat, at least not by sight, yet the dog's warning wasn't random. Working dogs didn't waste energy on ghosts. Margaret saw Ryan's shift, and her fingers tightened in Duke's fur. He knows, she whispered. She didn't say what he knew. She didn't have to. Ryan's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from readiness. He lowered his gaze back to the dog, meeting those intelligent eyes. The German shepherd stared at him, as if testing whether Ryan could be trusted with whatever storm was about to break. And in that bright, brutal winter morning, with snow falling like white ash and an old woman selling her last warmth for $5, Ryan felt the world tilt. Somewhere behind him, something moved closer, carried not by sound but by scent and intention. The dog's low rumble deepened, and Ryan realized the quiet morning had ended. He began to rise, slowly, carefully, as if standing might trigger whatever was approaching. The German shepherd's ears locked forward, his body coiling like a spring, and the air around them suddenly tasted sharp, metallic, wrong, like danger-wearing perfume. The light did not soften. If anything, it sharpened, turning the falling snow into fine needles of white glass that caught on coats and lashes and refused to melt. Wind slid through the riverfront like a blade laid flat, not howling, not dramatic, just efficient, testing every layer, every breath. Ryan stayed where he was, a respectful distance from Margaret and the German shepherd, letting the morning speak first. The dog's low rumble faded, replaced by a taut stillness that felt coiled rather than calm. Duke's body pressed closer to Margaret, his weight anchoring her, his eyes tracking the street behind Ryan, with the patience of something that had learned the cost of guessing wrong. Ryan lowered himself another inch, balanced on the balls of his feet, hands visible, palms open. I'm not here to take him, he said, voice steady, the kind that had carried through wind and engines and panic. I just want to understand. He watched Margaret's face as he spoke, the way lines gathered around her mouth when she thought, the way her chin trembled and then set, as if she were deciding whether to spend a last coin of trust. Margaret inhaled, a thin breath that seemed to rattle inside her chest. She was smaller up close, the coat swallowing her frame, her posture bent not by weakness, but by the long habit of bracing against things that didn't move. His name is Duke, she said finally, and the way she said it, careful, almost ceremonial, told Ryan that names mattered here. He used to work, police K9. Her hand slid along Duke's neck, fingers finding a familiar place beneath the fur as if checking a pulse. My son's partner. Ryan nodded once. He didn't interrupt. Silence had taught him more than questions ever had. My boy, Tom, he's not a boy anymore, Margaret went on, correcting herself with a faint, bitter smile. But to me, he'll always be. She swallowed. He's sick. Lungs, bad. The word bad carried weight, pressed down by the cold. He can't work. He can barely stand most days. Needs oxygen. Needs medicine. She gestured, a small, helpless movement. Winter doesn't care about any of that. Ryan followed her gaze to Duke again. The dog's ears shifted at the mention of Tom, not back in fear, not forward in challenge, but angled, listening inward, as if a memory had been called up by name. Duke's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again, scanning. A working mind never really shut off, it just learned to wait. "You're selling him to pay for that," Ryan said quietly. Margaret's mouth tightened. "I'm not selling him," she corrected, voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm trying to save them both." Her eyes lifted to Ryan's uniform, tracing the digital pattern without really seeing it. "He deserves warmth, food, a place where the floor doesn't freeze your bones. If someone else can give him that—" Her voice faltered, then steadied. "Then I'll do what I must." Ryan felt the familiar pressure behind his ribs, the one that came when logic collided with loyalty. He glanced at the cardboard sign again. $5. It wasn't a price. It was a plea, small enough not to offend pride, large enough to mean surrender. Duke shifted. His head dipped, nose brushing Margaret's knee, a reassurance that went both ways. His eyes flicked to Ryan, then to the snow at Ryan's boots, then beyond. The alertness returned, sharpened. Duke stood, not abruptly but decisively, placing himself half a step in front of Margaret, his body angled to shield her. The movement was instinctive, rehearsed by years of drills and real danger. Ryan noticed the way Duke distributed his weight, ready to spring or brace, a living barrier that made decisions faster than thought. Ryan followed Duke's gaze and felt it then, a wrongness in the air, faint but distinct, like oil on clean water. He shifted his stance, boots scraping softly on the icy crust. "You're not safe out here," he said, and this time it wasn't a suggestion. "Someone's been close." Margaret flinched. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I came early, before they woke." She didn't say who they were. She didn't need to. Ryan's eyes returned to Duke's neck. Beneath the twine that held the sign, the fur was pressed in a narrow line, the hair bent the wrong way. He leaned closer, careful, reading the story written there. It wasn't old. The skin beneath was slightly red, the kind of mark left by pressure applied recently. Not enough to cut, enough to control. A rope, maybe, or a cord. Someone had pulled. Someone had tried to move Duke. Ryan's jaw tightened. He straightened just enough to scan the sidewalk, the fence, the open park beyond, snow-preserved truths better than memories. Near the fence, half buried, were footprints that didn't match Margaret's careful shuffle or Duke's wide, purposeful pause. These were narrower, deeper at the heel, angled toward the street, then away again as if the owner had approached, hesitated, and retreated. The tread pattern was crisp. The bases as sharp. Recent. Margaret saw where he was looking and drew her coat tighter. "They came last night," she said. "Not the police, not friends." Her voice dropped. "They asked questions about the fire, about what Tom took out." Ryan's head snapped back to her. "What fire?" Margaret's eyes filled, not with tears but with a hard, reflective sheen. "Warehouse, years ago. Tom and Duke were there, smoke so thick it swallowed the lights." She paused, breathing through the memory. "They say something went missing after, something small but important. Tom never told me what. He said it wasn't safe." Duke let out a soft huff, almost a sigh, and turned his head toward the river, nostrils flaring. The wind carried scents from far off, fuel, cold iron, damp wood, and beneath them, something sharper. Duke's muscles tensed, his tail lifted a fraction, rigid, not wagging. Ryan moved closer, his voice low. "Margaret, I need you to listen to me." He chose his words the way he'd chosen routes through hostile streets, carefully, with an exit in mind. "Someone tried to take Duke, that mark—" He gestured, stopping short of touching. "It's new, and those footprints, someone didn't want to be seen." Margaret nodded, as if she had expected this confirmation. "They think Duke remembers," she said. "They think dogs forget." A faint, humorless smile crossed her face. "They don't." Ryan exhaled slowly. He felt the pieces sliding into place with the inevitable click of a lock. He had seen this pattern before, different names, same shape. An old event, a missing truth, pressure applied to the weakest link. An elderly woman. A retired dog. A sick man who couldn't fight back. A shadow moved at the far end of the street, briefly breaking the white symmetry. Ryan's gaze snapped up. A dark vehicle idled near the curb, engine muted, windows reflecting snow. It wasn't parked badly. It wasn't parked well. It was waiting. Duke growled again, deeper now, the sound vibrating through his chest and into the ground. He took a step forward, then stopped at an invisible boundary, eyes locked on the vehicle. Margaret's hand shook where it rested on his collar. "Duke," she murmured, and the dog held, obedience overriding instinct by a hair's breadth. Ryan rose to his full height, the uniform's digital pattern catching light, breaking up his outline. He didn't stare at the car. He stared past it, the way predators do when they want to be noticed without revealing intent. His presence changed the math of the street. The vehicle's brake lights flickered, then went dark again. "Come with me," Ryan said to Margaret, not asking. "We'll get you inside, somewhere warm, somewhere visible." He glanced at Duke. "He stays with you." Margaret hesitated, eyes darting between Ryan and the car, between safety and habit. Then she nodded once. "All right." As Ryan offered his arm, Duke's attention snapped back to Margaret, his body aligning with hers as if tethered. The footprints by the fence began to fill with new snow, softening, erasing. The mark on Duke's neck remained. Behind them, the dark vehicle eased away from the curb, tires whispering over ice, disappearing into the bright morning without headlights. The wind cut again, precise as ever. Ryan felt the city hold its breath. Something had already begun, and whatever it wasn't finished with Duke or with them. The street where Margaret lived looked deceptively gentle under the winter sun. Snow sat on the roofs like sifted sugar, bright enough to hurt the eyes, and the narrow row of houses leaned toward one another as if sharing warmth by proximity alone. Ryan walked beside Margaret, matching her careful pace, the crunch of his boots steady and deliberate. Duke stayed close to her left knee, head level, eyes scanning, his gait smooth despite the ice. The brightness outside suggested comfort. The cold inside would prove otherwise. When Margaret unlocked the door, her hand shook so hard the key rattled against the frame, and the moment the door opened, a breath of air rolled out that was sharp and stale, the kind that carried the metallic tang of months without proper heat. It felt heavier than the cold outside, as if the house had been holding it, saving it, waiting to release it on anyone foolish enough to enter. Ryan stepped in first, instinctively, shoulders filling the doorway. The living room was narrow and dim, the light coming mostly from the window where snow reflected the sun back into the room in a pale wash. Furniture huddled together as if for warmth, a couch with sagging cushions, a small table scarred by years of use, a space heater unplugged and cold, its cord coiled like a dead snake. Blankets lay folded and unfolded everywhere, layered not for comfort but survival. On the couch lay Tom. Tom Harris looked older than his years and younger than his life. He was in his early 40s, tall even in repose, but wasted by illness to a thinness that made his collarbones stand out sharply beneath a worn sweater. His skin held a bluish pallor, especially around the lips, and each breath he took sounded like it had to be negotiated, drawn in with effort and released with a faint wheeze, as if his lungs were stiff doors that resisted opening. A short beard shadowed his jaw, uneven where he'd stopped shaving with care, and his hair, once dark, was threaded with gray at the temples. His eyes, when they flickered open at the sound of the door, were alert despite exhaustion, the eyes of a man who had trained himself to notice details and never quite learned how to stop. Years ago, work had shaped him into someone decisive and brave. The fire had reshaped him into someone cautious, conserving energy the way others conserved money. Duke moved immediately, crossing the room in 3 quiet steps and lowering himself at Tom's feet, body angled outward, chin lifted. The posture was textbook, guard and comfort at once. Tom's hand slid off the blanket and found Duke's fur, fingers trembling but sure, and the dog leaned into the touch, a low, steady presence anchoring the room. Tom exhaled, a thin sound, and managed a small smile that barely lifted one corner of his mouth. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, voice rough as gravel. Margaret hovered by the door, torn between relief and shame, her shoulders hunched as if bracing for judgment. Ryan took in the room quickly, cataloging what mattered. No visible oxygen tank, no working heat source, no food in sight beyond a loaf of bread stiff with cold on the counter. He knelt near the couch, not crowding, his movements economical. "I'm Ryan," he said to Tom, keeping his tone level. "We met outside." Tom nodded, breath hitching. I figured, he said. Uniform gives it away. His gaze lingered on the digital camouflage, then slid back to Duke. He didn't scare you off, did he? Not even a little, Ryan replied. He glanced at Duke, then back at Tom. He's doing his job. Tom's eyes softened. He always does. The cold inside pressed in, a constant, invasive thing. Ryan pulled off one glove, testing the air near the window. The seal was bad. Frost traced the edges of the glass like veins. He straightened and took out his phone. We need help in here, he said, already dialing. The first call went to emergency assistance. Polite voices, rehearsed sympathy, questions about eligibility. Ryan answered them all, jaw tightening with each deferral. The second call went to medical services, then to a veterans hotline. Each time the response came wrapped in procedure. Intake forms, wait lists, hours. Outside, the snow kept shining, indifferent. Margaret sat on the arm of a chair, hands folded tight in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. She listened without interrupting, absorbing the words she had already heard too many times. They mean well, she whispered once when Ryan ended a call. They just move slow. Ryan looked at Tom, at the way his chest struggled for each breath. Slow isn't an option, he said quietly. Tom let out a breath that turned into a cough, harsh and rattling. Duke lifted his head instantly, ears pricked, eyes intent. Tom waved a weak hand. I'm fine, he said, a reflex more than a truth. It passes. He swallowed and looked at Ryan, something guarded flickering there. You don't have to get involved. Ryan met his gaze. I already am. Tom studied him for a moment, measuring the way he might have once assessed a partner. Figures, he said. You look like the kind who doesn't walk away. The light in the room shifted as a cloud passed, the brightness dimming for a moment before returning. Ryan's phone buzzed with another callback, another apology, another referral. He ended it with a controlled exhale. We'll keep trying, he said, but we need to get you warmer now. He scanned the room again, then shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over Tom's legs, the digital pattern breaking up against the blankets. Tom protested weakly. Ryan ignored it. Margaret's eyes filled. Thank you, she said, the words pressed flat by pride. Ryan nodded once. He moved toward the small bedroom off the living room, checking quickly. The same cold, the same lack. When he returned, Duke was standing again, body tense, head turned toward the far corner of the living room near a small table stacked with old papers in a worn duffel bag. The bag was canvas, olive drab, frayed at the seams, the kind issued long ago and kept longer. Tom followed Duke's gaze, and his jaw tightened. That's just my old gear, Tom said quickly, too quickly. Nothing important. Duke didn't relax. He took 2 slow steps toward the bag, nose low, tail stiff. A sound cut through the room, a faint vibration, irregular, muffled by fabric. It stopped, then started again. Margaret looked up, startled. Tom? She whispered. Tom's face drained of what little color it had. He tried to sit up and failed, breath catching. It shouldn't. He broke off, coughing hard, one hand gripping Duke's fur as if to keep himself from floating away. The vibration came again, unmistakable now, the sound of a phone set to silent but insistent enough to be felt. Duke barked once, sharp and urgent, then planted himself between the couch and the bag, teeth bared, not in anger but warning. His eyes were locked on that corner, pupils dilated, the memory of 100 drills surfacing at once. Ryan moved without hesitation. He crossed the room, placing himself just ahead of Duke, one hand raised slightly to signal calm, the other hovering near the bag. He listened. The vibration stopped. The house seemed to hold its breath. Who knows about that bag? Ryan asked, keeping his voice low. Tom swallowed. People who shouldn't, he said. People who think time makes things disappear. The vibration started again, longer this time, as if whoever was calling had grown impatient. Duke growled, deep and sustained, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. Outside, a car passed, tires whispering over snow, the normal world sliding by, unaware. Ryan crouched, fingers brushing the edge of the canvas. We're not opening it, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Not yet. He looked back at Tom. But we're not ignoring it either. The vibration stopped abruptly. Silence rushed in to fill the gap, louder than the sound had been. Duke held his stance, muscles coiled, waiting for the next cue. Ryan straightened slowly, eyes scanning the room, then the window, then the door. The brightness outside felt suddenly fragile, a thin shell over something darker. He took a step back toward the couch, positioning himself so he could see both the door and the corner with the bag. "We're not alone in this," he said. Tom nodded faintly, exhaustion weighing him down. "I was hoping I was wrong," he murmured. Duke pressed closer to him, a living promise that he would not be. In the bright, freezing room, with the phone's ghost sound still echoing in their ears, Ryan understood that the cold was the least of their problems. Whatever lay in that bag had woken something that had been content to sleep, and it had just announced itself. The phone kept vibrating inside the old canvas bag as if it had learned to breathe on its own. Ryan knelt, unzipping the frayed mouth just enough to see the screen flare weakly to life, its cracked glass catching the reflected snowlight from the window. The caller ID read a single, impersonal line, "Private number." The device was old, thick, utilitarian, the kind issued to people who valued reliability over polish. Its casing bore nicks and heat scars, as if it had once been too close to flame. The vibration stopped the moment Ryan lifted it, as though whoever was on the other end had sensed the change in hands. Then it started again, longer, insistently patient. Tom stirred on the couch, a shallow breath hitching. He tried to lift his arm, failed, and then tried again, fingers clawing at the blanket with urgency that his body could no longer support. "Don't!" he rasped, eyes wide now, not with pain but recognition. His pupils tracked the phone like a trapped animal's, calculating distance and options that weren't there. "Please, just don't." Margaret had risen without realizing it, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Her face had drained of color, leaving her skin translucent, the blue of old veins faintly visible at her temples. "They found us," she whispered, the words barely audible. Her gaze flicked to the door, then to the window, as if danger could be identified by its shape. "They promised they wouldn't come here." Ryan didn't answer. He pressed accept and lifted the phone to his ear, keeping his body between Tom and the corner of the room. Duke's growl deepened, a low, steady vibration that resonated through the floorboards. The dog's hackles lifted in a ripple from shoulders to tail, his posture tall and immovable. He wasn't lunging, he wasn't barking, he was remembering. The voice on the line came through thin and sharp, stripped of warmth by compression and distance. It sounded practiced, neither hurried nor gentle, as if the speaker had made calls like this many times and knew exactly how long to pause between words. "You're late," the voice said. Not angry, not loud, certain. Ryan said nothing. Silence had weight, and he let it fall. "I know you can hear me," the voice continued. "We don't need to do this the hard way." Duke's growl broke into a brief warning bark. Ryan raised one finger without looking back, and the dog held at, jaw set, eyes burning. The voice paused, then returned, colder. "Don't let the dog interfere." The words landed like a blade laid flat on skin, intimate and threatening all at once. "He's retired. Let him stay that way." Tom's breath turned ragged. "They know about Duke," he said, voice cracking, shame and fear tangled together. "They always did." Ryan leaned slightly away from the phone, enough to keep Tom in his peripheral vision. "Who is this?" he asked, tone even. A faint exhale on the line suggested amusement. "Someone who cleans up," the voice replied. "And someone who doesn't like loose ends." Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth. She had lived long enough to recognize that tone, the tone of people who believed rules were for other people. Her knees trembled, but she didn't sit. Pride held her upright. "You're calling a sick man in a freezing house, Ryan said. "That's your leverage?" The voice clicked its tongue softly. "We're calling because something was taken from a warehouse fire 8 years ago. Something small, something valuable, something your friend here never returned." A pause. "We're calling because dogs remember and men talk, even when they think they won't." Duke's ears snapped forward at the word dogs. His nostrils flared, and for a heartbeat the room seemed to fill with the scent of smoke and chemicals, memory layered over present. Ryan felt it too, not the smell but the shift. This wasn't a random threat. It was specific, rehearsed. Tom swallowed hard. "I didn't take it," he said hoarsely, as if the person on the line could hear him without the phone. I carried it out so it wouldn't burn. That's not theft. Intent doesn't interest us, the voice replied. Outcome does. Ryan's jaw tightened. He pictured the fire Tom had described, the heat, the confusion, the way survival choices get made in seconds and judged for years. You're not law enforcement, Ryan said. It wasn't a question. No, the voice agreed. We're the reason law enforcement sometimes stops asking. Margaret's eyes filled, but her voice surprised them all with its steadiness. My son almost died in that fire, she said, leaning toward the phone. And that dog saved him. Twice. Her words trembled only at the end. Leave us alone. There was a soft chuckle on the line, dry as paper. Ma'am, Winter doesn't care about fairness. Neither do we. The call ended. The silence afterward was loud enough to hurt. Ryan lowered the phone slowly, the cracked screen dimming back to black. Duke's growl faded into a tense quiet, but he didn't relax. He took one step closer to the window, eyes fixed on the white glare outside as if reading a story written in snow. Tom closed his eyes, breath coming in short pulls. I told them I lost it, he whispered. I told them it burned. He looked at Ryan, guilt etched into every line of his face. I didn't think they'd come after her. Ryan knelt beside the couch, meeting Tom's gaze. What is it? He asked. What did you carry out? Tom hesitated, then shook his head weakly. Not here, he said. Not with them listening. Margaret sank back into her chair, the fight draining from her limbs. She stared at the phone in Ryan's hand as if it were a live thing. They said the dog, she murmured. Why Duke? Because Duke saw, Tom said. And because Duke remembers. His eyes flicked to the German shepherd, and for a moment pride pierced the fear. He always did. Ryan stood and moved to the window. Outside, the brightness had sharpened again, the snow reflecting sunlight so fiercely it washed color from the world. He lifted the edge of the curtain just enough to see. Across the street, near the curb, a black sedan sat idling. It was clean, anonymous, the kind of car designed to disappear. No headlights, no hazard lights, just presence. The driver's window was dark, the interior unreadable. It had been there long enough to leave a thin melt pattern in the snow beneath its tires. Duke followed Ryan's gaze and stiffened, every muscle locking into readiness. His tail lifted, rigid, and a low growl rolled out of him, controlled and dangerous. Margaret felt it in her bones. They're still here, she said. Ryan let the curtain fall. Yes, he replied. And they're patient. He turned back to the room, making quick decisions. He pocketed the phone, keeping it powered off. We're not staying, he said. Not tonight. Tom tried to protest, then coughed instead, the sound harsh and wet. Duke moved instantly, placing his body closer to Tom's legs, eyes flicking between Ryan and the window, tracking both worlds at once. Margaret pushed herself up again. Where would we go? Somewhere warm, somewhere crowded, Ryan said. Visibility is protection. He glanced at Duke. And you don't leave him. Duke's ears angled back briefly at the word leave, then forward again, as if reassured by the tone. He pressed his head against Margaret's thigh, steadying her. Outside, the black sedan remained motionless, a dark punctuation mark at the end of the street. Ryan felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the calm before movement. This wasn't just about medicine or heat anymore. It was about a truth someone wanted buried, and a dog who wouldn't forget the scent of fire. As Ryan helped Margaret gather what little they could carry, Duke stayed planted between Tom and the door, a silent promise etched into muscle and bone. The brightness outside did nothing to soften the danger. It only made it easier to see. Night settled without darkness. Snow and streetlights conspired to keep the city bright, a pale glow pooling on sidewalks and window glass as if Minneapolis refused to admit what hour it was. The black sedan was gone, but its absence felt deliberate rather than relieving, like a chessboard after a piece had moved out of sight. Inside the house, the cold had learned the layout and moved freely, slipping under doors and into corners. Ryan stayed. He did not announce the decision. It arrived the way gravity does, quietly, unavoidable. He set a kettle on the stove, the metal thin enough to sing when the flame caught, and listened for that sound like a small promise. His movements were efficient, unshowy. He boiled water, poured it carefully into a chipped mug, wrapped it with a towel so Margaret's fingers wouldn't burn. He layered blankets over Tom's legs and chest, checking the rise and fall of his breathing, counting between breaths the way he had once counted steps in hostile places. Tom's pulse fluttered under Ryan's fingers, too fast, too shallow, the rhythm of a body conserving everything it had left. Margaret sat close, hands folded so tightly the knuckles shone. In the false daylight spilling through the window, her face looked carved from wax and worry. She had been a sturdy woman once. Ryan could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself when she thought no one was watching. But years of bracing against bad news had worn her down to essentials. She didn't cry. She didn't pace. She watched Tom's chest and mouthed prayers that had lost their edges from use. Duke lay near the door, angled so he could see both the couch and the threshold. He didn't sleep. He performed a series of micro-movements instead, ears flicking, eyes shifting, nostrils testing the air every few seconds. His coat caught the light in shades of black and sable, and the scar on his ear shone pale against dark fur. He was 8 or 9, maybe older, but age had not softened his vigilance. It had refined it. This was the posture of a guardian who understood thresholds, the thin line between inside and out, safe and not. Ryan returned from the kitchen and knelt by Tom again. "Stay with me," he said softly. Not command, not plea, just presence. Tom's eyes opened, unfocused, then found Ryan's face and steadied. He tried to smile. It didn't quite work. "Didn't think it would come to this," he whispered. "Neither did Winter," Ryan replied. He adjusted the blankets, checking skin temperature, checking lips, too blue. He glanced at Duke. The dog's gaze met his, an exchange older than words. "Ready." The kettle's song cut off abruptly as the flame died. The house exhaled, colder without that small defiance. Ryan stood, relit it, and listened again. Outside, a car passed, tires whispering over snow. The normal world moved. Inside, time compressed. Margaret shifted, her voice brittle. "He's colder," she said. Ryan leaned in. Tom's breath caught. His body jerked, a brief, violent tremor that rattled the couch. His lips darkened another shade, the blue deepening like ink in water. Margaret gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. Duke exploded into motion. The dog launched himself to Tom's side, barking sharp and urgent, the sound filling the room and then cutting off as if on cue. He pressed his nose against Ryan's wrist, hard, insistent, then back to Tom's chest, then back to Ryan again. The message was unmistakable. Now. Duke's tail was rigid, ears forward, eyes blazing with purpose. He had smelled this before. He knew the shape of it. Ryan moved. He checked airway, tilt and lift, listened for obstruction. He counted breaths. Too few. Too shallow. He reached for his phone. The screen lit. One bar flickered, then two. He hit 911. The ringtone chimed once. Then the signal dropped. The screen went dark as if someone had pinched the line between fingers. Ryan stared at it for a half-second that felt like a year, then tried again. Nothing. He moved toward the window, lifting the phone higher, turning, searching for the invisible ladder of reception that might exist in one precise angle. Duke barked again, louder, then stopped, placing his body between Tom and the door as if daring the world to try something else while this was happening. Margaret rose, panic finally cracking her stillness. "Ryan." "I know," Ryan said, already moving. He checked Tom's pulse again. Thready, slipping. "Boil water," he told Margaret, "as hot as you can." He pulled the space heater closer anyway, plugged it in despite knowing better, as if hope might trick physics. It coughed once, then fell silent. Dead. He returned to Tom, rubbing warmth into his hands, into his arms, speaking constantly, keeping the man tethered. "Stay with me. Don't go anywhere." He checked the phone again. One bar appeared like a taunt, then vanished. Outside, the brightness pressed against the glass, merciless. Snow reflected light back into the room, making the emergency feel staged under a spotlight. Ryan moved to the back of the house, phone raised, then to the front, then up the narrow steps to the small bedroom, each place offering nothing. Duke tracked him with his eyes, never leaving Tom's side. Tom convulsed again, shorter this time, then went still. His chest barely moved. Ryan felt the old calm settle, the one that arrived when panic had nothing useful left to offer. He knelt, positioned Tom carefully, began assisted breathing, counting, watching for response. Margaret hovered to useless hands trembling, tears finally spilling and freezing on her lashes. Come on, Ryan murmured, more to the world than to Tom. Not tonight. Duke lowered his head and whined, a sound thin and raw, then straightened and barked 3 times, spaced, deliberate. It wasn't noise, it was signal. The dog moved to the door, pawed at it once, then stood rigid, ears high, eyes locked on the window. He smelled something, metal, ozone, human movement. His body language changed from medical alert to perimeter breach in a breath. Ryan felt it too, the pressure in the room shifting. He rose just enough to glance outside. The streetlight cast long white shadows. At the end of the block, a vehicle slowed, then stopped. No headlights, just a dark shape swallowing light. "Margaret," Ryan said quietly, never taking his eyes off the window. "Stay with Tom." Duke growled, deep and sustained, a sound that warned without begging. Ryan tried 911 again. The call rang once, twice. Nothing. The vehicle outside idled. Snow fell, indifferent. Ryan's jaw set. He moved back to Tom, resumed assisted breaths, kept the rhythm steady. Duke stayed between Ryan and the door, a living wall. The dog's eyes flicked between Tom and the window, calculating 2 threats at once. This was why K9s were trained, not to choose, but to hold. Margaret pressed her forehead to her clasped hands. "Please," she whispered to no one and everyone. Ryan's phone buzzed, not a call, a notification. A weak signal spike. He dialed again, heart hammering once, then settling. The ringtone chimed. Then the screen went dark. Outside, the vehicle's brake lights flared briefly, painting the snow red, then vanished. Duke barked once, furious, then fell silent, muscles coiled. Ryan felt the chapter closing around them like a fist. He kept breathing for Tom, counting aloud, steady as a metronome, while the city pretended it was morning and the line to help slipped just out of reach. Ryan lifted Tom as if lifting something breakable and precious, careful not to jolt the shallow breath still fighting in his chest. The streetlights turned the snow into a blinding sheet of white, each flake catching light and throwing it back, so the night looked like day, painted over with frost. Tom's weight was less than Ryan expected. Illness had pared him down to essentials, and that fact burned more than the cold. Margaret followed, her boots slipping, hands clutching the doorframe once before she let go and trusted momentum. Duke circled them in tight arcs, barking sharp, urgent notes that cut through the air like thrown glass, eyes never leaving the end of the block where the black sedan idled with predatory patience. Ryan settled Tom into the passenger seat, angled him back, adjusted the belt to support a chest that refused to cooperate. He wrapped Tom in every blanket he could reach, then shrugged out of his own jacket and layered it on top, the digital camouflage breaking into the white glare. Margaret climbed into the back, breath coming fast, her face pale but set. Duke leapt into the rear well, then froze, head snapping toward the street, hackles high. The sedan rolled forward a few feet, slow enough to look casual. It was anything but. Ryan slammed the driver's door, the sound sharp and final, and turned the key. The engine coughed, caught, roared, an answer to Duke's bark. Tires spun once on ice, then found purchase. They surged forward, snow spraying in a glittering arc. Duke barked again, then steadied, his voice changing from alarm to cadence, a drumbeat for motion. The sedan followed. It did not rush, it did not fall back. It matched distance with unnerving precision, headlights still dark, its silhouette swallowing reflected light like a hole in the scene. Ryan kept the wheel steady, eyes tracking reflections and shadows, his body remembering angles and timing older than thought. He took the first corner hard, felt the rear slide, corrected without drama. Margaret gripped the seat, murmuring Tom's name between breaths. Tom stirred, eyes fluttering, then closed again. Duke braced himself, paws wide, body leaning with the turns, head swiveling to watch the sedan as if memorizing it cell by cell. He barked in bursts now, each one purposeful, not frantic, as if he were calling witnesses that could hear only through the bones of the city. Ryan glanced in the mirror and saw the sedan close the gap by a car length, then hold. It wanted them contained. They reached an intersection where the lights burned green over a cross street washed in white. Ryan accelerated. The sedan did too. At the last second, the black car surged ahead, engine snarling, and slid sideways across the intersection, blocking the lane with brutal grace. Ryan braked hard. Tires screamed. Snow exploded upward in a luminous cloud. The sedan stopped broadside. For a breathless second, the world held. Then the driver's door opened. The man who stepped out was tall and narrow, built like a blade rather than a wall. He wore a dark coat that drank light, collar turned up, gloved hands moving with economy. His face was pale, sharp-featured, with a trimmed beard that outlined a mouth accustomed to issuing decisions rather than requests. His eyes were flat and assessing, the color indistinct under the streetlight glare. He didn't hurry. He didn't posture. He walked toward Ryan's hood with the confidence of someone who believed the ending had already been agreed upon. Duke went rigid, his bark cut off mid-note, replaced by a low, vibrating growl that seemed to come from the ground itself. His teeth showed, not in frenzy, but in warning. Margaret gasped, one hand flying to her chest. The man stopped a few feet away, raised one hand in a mockery of calm, and spoke with a voice that carried easily through the cold. "Hand over the dog." Ryan did not open the door. He did not speak. He met the man's eyes and held them, letting the silence stretch, letting the brightness make everything visible. The man's gaze flicked to Duke, lingered, sharpened. Recognition flashed there, not fear, not anger, but calculation. "Don't make this harder," the man said. "We don't want the sick one. We want the animal." Duke lunged forward until the harness caught, muscles roping under his coat. Ryan felt the tremor through the car. He put one hand back without looking, palm open, fingers spread. Duke held, growl deepening but body still, the discipline of years pressing down on instinct by a hair. "You're blocking a public road," Ryan said finally, voice level, carrying the weight of rules even as they frayed. "Move." The man smiled thinly. "We'll be quick." Ryan's phone buzzed once, no bars, no call, then went dead again. Snow drifted between them, bright and silent. The man took another step closer, his hand sliding into his coat pocket with a casual inevitability that needed no translation. Ryan made his decision. He dropped the car into reverse and gunned it, cranking the wheel hard. The tires bit, then skated. The sedan's driver reacted instantly, pivoting back toward his door. Ryan swung wide, clipped the edge of the intersection, and shot down the cross street, snow exploding in their wake. Duke barked, one fierce, triumphant note, then braced again. Margaret cried out as the car fishtailed, then steadied when Ryan corrected, his movements precise and merciless. The sedan lurched after them, headlights flaring to life at last, beams slicing the white night. They tore through side streets washed in light, past shuttered shops and silent houses whose windows reflected the chase like a fever dream. Ryan kept speed where he could and restraint where he must, threading corners, using glare and snowbanks as shields. Duke tracked the sedan relentlessly, calling out with every bark, a living siren that refused to be ignored. Tom groaned, a thin sound. Ryan glanced over, adjusted his angle, spoke without turning his head. "Stay with me," he said again. "We're almost clear." They burst onto a wider road where the lamps burned brighter, traffic thinned but present. Ryan merged with a gap that forced the sedan to brake or collide. It chose to brake. The distance widened by a heartbeat. Ryan took it, veering toward a cluster of buildings where light spilled from a late-night clinic sign. He slowed only enough to turn, then accelerated into the lot, skidding to a stop under a canopy blazing white. Duke barked once, sharp, then fell silent, eyes locked on the entrance. Ryan cut the engine, leapt out, and opened the passenger door. Cold rushed in. Margaret clambered out, shaking, while Ryan lifted Tom again, faster now, urgency eclipsing caution. Duke hit the ground and spun, placing himself between Ryan and the drive, stance wide, chest out, a statue of refusal. The sedan rolled past the lot entrance without turning in, headlights sweeping the canopy in a wash of white before sliding away. It did not stop. It did not need to. The message had been delivered. Ryan carried Tom through the clinic doors, warmth slamming into him like a wave. Voices rose, footsteps hurried. Duke followed until a hand stopped him, gentle but firm. He balked, then sat, eyes never leaving Tom, chest heaving, tail rigid. Outside, snow continued to fall, bright and merciless. Inside, hands reached for Tom, words layered over one another, procedures beginning. Ryan stood back only when forced, breath coming hard, eyes searching the glass for any return of black paint and dark intent. Duke waited, unblinking, the night's work not yet done. The clinic's canopy burned white against the night, a square of artificial daylight carved out of winter. Snow kept falling, bright and relentless, turning breath into smoke and sound into something fragile. Ryan stood just outside the glass doors, the Navy working uniform's digital camouflage breaking his outline into hard geometry beneath the lights. He looked almost out of place there, too composed, too still, like a seawall built for storms rather than sidewalks. Calm settled on him the way it always did when chaos tried to bargain. His face gave nothing away, but his eyes were sharp, measuring angles and distances, listening for the lie inside the quiet. Behind the glass, hands moved quickly around Tom, tubes, blankets, clipped commands. Margaret hovered, small and pale, her shoulders squared by necessity. Duke had been forced to sit just inside the threshold, a compromise between policy and mercy. He sat upright, chest broad, ears forward, eyes never leaving Ryan. His coat caught the light in bands of black and sable. The scar on his ear shone like a pale signature. He looked younger like this, alert, purposeful, until you noticed the gray at his muzzle and the patience in his stillness. He was 8 or 9, a veteran who had learned the value of waiting. The street beyond the canopy breathed. A patrol car idled at the corner, its lights off, presence implied rather than announced. A delivery van passed, tires hissing over slush. Then another sound joined the mix, a different engine note, lower, deliberate. Ryan didn't turn immediately. He felt it before he saw it, the way pressure changes ahead of weather. A black sedan rolled into view and stopped just beyond the wash of light. The man from the intersection stepped out again. Up close, he was taller than Ryan had guessed, long-limbed, narrow through the waist, his coat cut to move rather than impress. His beard was trimmed close, the line precise, a face that had learned to keep emotion efficient. He didn't carry a weapon in his hands. He didn't need to. Confidence did the work for him. "Still standing," the man said, voice carrying easily across the snow. "That's impressive." Ryan shifted half a step, placing himself squarely between the man and the doors. "You're done," he replied. "Leave." The man smiled without warmth. "We would have," he said, "if you'd handed over what we came for." Ryan didn't blink. "Tom isn't for sale." The man's eyes flicked past Ryan, through the glass toward Duke. The smile changed shape, thinner, more exact. "We don't want Tom." The words landed with clarity sharp enough to cut. Ryan felt Margaret's gasp through the glass before he heard it. Duke's ears snapped forward. The dog leaned, muscles coiling, a sound starting low in his chest and stopping there, held by discipline. "You already know that," the man continued. "We've been patient, years actually. Fires tend to scatter things. People forget. Dogs don't." He tilted his head slightly, studying Duke as if reading a familiar page. "Your partner there?" He remembers. Ryan's jaw set. "Back away." "Relax," the man said lightly. "This isn't personal. It's logistics." He took one step closer to the edge of the light and stopped, the brightness flattening his features. 8 years ago, during a warehouse fire, something left that building when it shouldn't have. Something small, something sealed. Your friend carried it out to keep it from burning. Smart, really. Humane. He paused. "And he hid it." Ryan held his ground. "Prove it." The man's gaze returned to Duke. "He already has." At that, Duke surged forward, the leash snapping taut. He barked once, fierce and sudden, then broke into motion. He did not run at the man. He veered hard, sprinting toward a light pole just beyond the canopy where the snowbank rose higher from plow spillover. His paws churned white as he circled, nose down, tail rigid. He scratched at the snow with intent, not frenzy, then stopped and looked back at Ryan, eyes blazing, chest heaving. He scratched again, deeper, exposing a darker layer beneath the glittering surface. Ryan moved without hesitation. He crossed the few steps to Duke, dropped to a knee, and brushed snow aside with his gloved hands. The sound changed, snow to ice to metal. He felt it through the gloves, a flat plane, cold and unyielding. He cleared more, breath fogging, heart steady. A corner emerged, steel, rectangular, sealed. Margaret had come to the doorway, hands pressed to the glass, eyes wide. Inside, a nurse glanced up, startled, then froze when she saw what Ryan was uncovering. She was a woman in her 30s, tall and slender, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun that suggested both order and exhaustion. Her skin was warm brown against the clinic's white light, her expression practiced calm, cracked by surprise. She did not step forward, she did not step back, she simply watched, instincts telling her this moment did not belong to her protocols. Ryan cleared the rest. A metal box lay buried beneath the snow, edges squared, seals intact, surface scarred by heat. It was the size of a thick book, heavy for its dimensions. A faint stencil, half obliterated by time and fire, marked one side. Duke stood over it, panting, head high as if guarding a fallen comrade. The man exhaled softly. There it is. Ryan lifted the box enough to test the weight, then set it back down. You don't get it. The man's smile returned, almost genuine now. On the contrary, that box doesn't belong to you, or to the city, or to the clinic. His eyes hardened. It belongs to us. Behind them, another sound approached, the distant wail of a siren, faint at first, then clearer, layered with another and another. Tires hissed closer, doors thumped, voices carried. The man's gaze flicked toward the sound, then back to Ryan. You're making this messy. Ryan straightened, placing his boot subtly in front of the box. You made it messy 8 years ago. Duke's growl rose again, low and continuous, a living warning line drawn in the snow. The man looked down at the dog, calculating. He's impressive, he said. Smart, loyal. A pause. Expensive. Step back, Ryan said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The sirens grew louder, lights painting the snow in red and blue pulses that shattered the false daylight. A patrol car slid to a stop near the canopy. Another pulled in behind it. Doors opened. Boots hit pavement. The man took a slow step back into the darkness beyond the light, hands visible now, palms open in a show of reason. This isn't over, he said, voice carrying less certainty than before. Boxes don't disappear. Dogs don't forget. Ryan watched him retreat, eyes tracking every movement. Neither do I. The man melted into shadow as uniformed officers approached, questions ready, attention drawn by the uncovered metal. The nurse finally moved, ushering Margaret back inside, her voice gentle but firm. Duke stayed with Ryan, body angled between him and the box, breathing steadying as the immediate threat ebbed. An officer crouched near the snowbank, flashlight beam cutting across the steel. What is that? Ryan didn't answer right away. He looked at Duke, at the way the dog's gaze had softened now, duty momentarily fulfilled. He rested a hand on Duke's neck, feeling the strength there, the memory. Something they were willing to hurt people to get, he said finally. Behind them, sirens still approached, closer now, layered with authority. Snow kept falling, bright and unrelenting, as if the city wanted the truth illuminated. Dawn arrived without ceremony, then refused to be ignored. It poured across the city in a cold, brilliant wash, turning the snow into a field of quiet fireworks. Every surface caught light, rooftops, windshields, bare branches, and threw it back cleaner than night ever could. Ryan stood on the steps of the precinct with the sealed metal box cradled against his ribs, feeling its weight settle into a different kind of gravity. The digital camouflage of his Navy working uniform fractured the brightness into angles, but the light still found him. It always did at the end. Inside the precinct, movement was brisk and purposeful. Phones rang, doors opened and closed, coffee steamed and went cold. Ryan handed the box to the desk sergeant without flourish, explaining just enough to route it where it needed to go. The sergeant was a stocky man with iron-gray hair and a jaw that had learned to clamp down on secrets. He listened, nodded once, and disappeared into the warren beyond the front desk. The chain clicked into place. Not all justice arrived on sirens. Some of it moved quietly through hallways built for patients. Across town, Tom lay in a hospital bed angled toward a window that captured the same winter sun. Oxygen hummed at his side with a steady, forgiving rhythm. Color had returned to his lips. Not much, but enough to matter, and his chest rose without the fight it had waged all night. He looked thinner under white sheets, but the tension in his face had loosened, the constant calculation of breath replaced by something like relief. A respiratory therapist, Sarah Klein, tall and spare, with pale blonde hair braided down her back and eyes the clear blue of a winter lake, adjusted a line and smiled with the calm competence of someone who had learned to hold hope carefully. She moved with efficiency and warmth, explaining each step to Margaret in a voice that never rushed, never patronized. Margaret listened, nodding, her hands finally unclenched. Duke lay on a blanket at the foot of the bed, his body curved toward Tom, head resting on his paws. For the first time in weeks, his eyes were closed all the way. His breathing slowed into a deep, even cadence, the kind that only comes when vigilance has permission to stand down. Sunlight slid across his coat, turning black to bronze, sable to gold. The scar on his ear glowed pale, a small badge in the warmth. He slept the sleep of a guardian who had finished his watch. The box did what boxes like that always did once they reached the right desks. It opened doors. Inside were records hardened by fire but legible enough. Photographs, ledgers, a memory stick sealed twice over, evidence that refused to stay buried. It connected names to money, money to warehouses, warehouses to nights when alarms failed and questions stopped being asked. The right people were called. The wrong people found their patients exhausted. The black sedan did not return. The story spread in the way true things do, sideways and human. A veteran at the coffee shop recognized Tom's name and remembered the fire. A K-9 handler heard about Duke and brought a crate of supplies that afternoon, then came back with another the next day. A neighbor with a ladder fixed the drafty window without being asked. The heater was repaired, then replaced with one that hummed like a contented animal. Blankets were folded and stacked for comfort rather than survival. The house learned a new temperature. Margaret moved through those days as if relearning her own weight. She stood taller, laughed in small bursts that surprised her, cried without apology when the quiet caught up. Her face softened where it had been carved hard, the blue of her eyes brightening in the reflected snowlight. She cooked soup and burned the first batch because she forgot to stir while watching Tom breathe. She burned the second too, because Duke nudged her knee at the wrong moment, tail wagging, convinced that happiness required interruption. Ryan visited without ceremony. He wore the same uniform, boots clean, posture easy. He fixed a loose step, carried groceries, listened more than he spoke. When Tom was strong enough to sit, they talked in short, honest sentences about fire and fear and the kind of choices that get judged in daylight by people who have never stood in smoke. Ryan never corrected, he never excused, he understood the difference. On a bright morning a week later, Tom stood by the window on his own, oxygen light and portable, and watched Duke doze in the sun. He knew, Tom said quietly. Back then, he knew where it was. I didn't even have to tell him. Ryan nodded. Dogs remember paths, people remember reasons. Margaret wiped her hands on a towel and leaned against the counter, studying Ryan with a look that mixed gratitude and resolve. I tried to sell him, she said, not accusing, not apologizing. I would have if it meant keeping my son. You tried to save them both, Ryan replied. You did. She smiled through tears. I won't ever forget that you saw the difference. The community didn't forget either. The Veterans Hall hosted a quiet fundraiser that filled the space without turning it into a spectacle. K-9 handlers came in uniform and out of it, shaking hands, telling stories that ended in laughter instead of funerals. Neighbors brought pies and awkward hugs. The house warmed in ways no furnace could manage alone. Duke adjusted to the new rhythm with grace. He followed Tom room to room, then settled, confident enough to sleep deeply, to dream. Sometimes he lifted his head at a passing siren, ears angling, but he did not rise. He trusted the morning now. On the day Ryan left, the sky was impossibly clear, the snow a clean canvas under the sun. He stood on the porch, breath clouding, looking at the house as if committing its lines to memory. Margaret pressed a small envelope into his hand. Inside was a photograph printed at the clinic kiosk. Tom in bed, Margaret beside him, Duke at the foot, sunlight everywhere. On the back, in careful handwriting, were 3 words. Thank you for staying. I don't take souvenirs, Ryan said gently. This isn't one, Margaret replied. It's a reminder. Duke padded out onto the porch, tail wagging once, deliberate. He pressed his head against Ryan's thigh, a brief, solid weight. Ryan crouched, scratched behind Duke's ears, felt the thrum of contentment there. You did good, he said, and meant all of it. Ryan walked away in the same uniform he'd worn when the story found him. He did not look back until the corner, and even then only once. The house stood bright against the snow, windows sealed, heat rising, life resuming its ordinary miracles. Dawn had done its work, but it hadn't done it alone. Some missions never make it into reports. They don't earn ribbons or speeches. They get written where it matters, in warmed rooms and steady breaths, in dogs sleeping without one eye open. Ryan carried that with him as he went, the way he carried everything that counted, quietly, and for the long haul. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, wearing a uniform, walking on a frozen street, or resting their head on the feet of someone they refuse to abandon. In this story, the miracle wasn't just a man surviving the night, it was a heart that chose to stop, a dog that remembered when the world wanted to forget, and a moment when God's hand moved through ordinary people, turning fear into warmth and despair into breath. In our daily lives, we may not face blizzards or dark cars waiting at the curb, but we all know cold nights of the soul, moments when help feels far away and hope feels too heavy to hold alone. If this story reminded you that God still works through kindness, courage, and loyalty, if it reminded you that no one is ever truly invisible, please take a moment to share this story with someone who may need it today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from or who you're praying for tonight. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories of faith, sacrifice, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel so more light can reach more hearts. May God bless you and your family. May He keep you warm in difficult seasons. And may you never forget that sometimes the miracle arrives quietly, right when you decide not to walk away.